weei-fm. We're continuing our Celtics talk, and we have a special treat today. We have the great Kevin O'Connor of Yahoo Sports. He's the host of the Kevin O'Connor Show, NBA insider, and has his local roots here in the Boston area. So, Kevin, thanks so much for joining us. And I'm going to start where I think a lot of people are wondering about, which is, how real is the mutual interest between the Celtics and Damian Lillard? And especially, we went back to some audio of Chris Haynes speaking on Damian Lillard's behalf in 2023, not sounding very interested in Boston. So how real do you feel the interest from Lillard's side might be in Boston?
I haven't heard anything directly necessarily with Lillard's interest. I mean, I think personally my own opinion is he should be interested. I mean, you've never won a championship. If you're looking for a team that gives you an opportunity to do that, when you do get back in the NBA, it's Boston, because there's no pressure on you to be the old Damian Lillard. You can be a guy who is an elite spot-up shooter, who moves without the ball, who focuses on playmaking, and not even have to start for that matter. So it depends on what his priorities are. Does he envision himself immediately being, the old Damian Lillard? Then maybe you don't want to go to Boston and compete with some of the other guys, including Pritchard, for some starter level minutes. But ultimately, I think Boston should be high up on his list.
Kevin, you mentioned Peyton Pritchard, and I'm curious how he fits in all this, because he wins Sixth Man of the Year last year. The Celtics add Anthony Simons, and I know they could still move on from Simons. But I wonder if Pritchard's a guy that they envision as a starter regardless, even if it's over Simons or potentially over a Damian Lillard, or they think he's going to stay in a sixth-man role. Like, how do you think they envision, or how do you envision Peyton Pritchard fitting in all of this?
I mean, I think with Pritchard, he's going to be a big minutes guy. You're going to find out what exactly you can get out of Peyton Pritchard. We see him be a sixth man of the year. We know what Pritchard can do. He's had some big scoring games when he gets opportunity. And so to me, like, whether it's Pritchard or whether it's, Baylor Shireman or the rookies, Hugo Gonzalez, to me, like, this is a year of experimentation for the Celtics. And I think if you're Brad Stevens and you're Joe Mazzulla, it's empowering Pritchard to have games where he shoots 25 times. It's trying out different young players, different types of roles, trying out different schemes and finding out what works, what's going to make sense to move forward with this core of Tatum and Brown. And I think, to me, like, Pritchard being the prime example of a guy that you want to give big minutes and big opportunities to, because you want to see what you actually can get out of him.
Kevin, that's a really interesting way to categorize it, or characterize it rather. A year of experimentation. So with what
difference from competing for titles, right?
Yeah, we went from potential three-peat to year of experimentation. Yeah,
life comes at you fast. Where the Celtics are right now in their roster building, do you think that they have their starting center on the roster as it sits today? How much more of a dramatic move or moves do you expect them to make with that big position?
I'm not so sure. I mean, look, I think they might have their 2025, 2026 starter, but I think ultimately so much of this is going to have to do with Al Horford. Is Horford going to sign immediately with the Warriors or the Lakers, or is he going to retire? Is he going to take a half season off and come back mid-year, a la PJ Brown, way back, different circumstances, way back 15, 20 years ago. And PJ Brown did that with the 08 Celtics, 09 Celtics when he came back. But ultimately, I think with Horford, he's the only guy that I could see, unless we're going to have a trade coming again, because I think for Stevens, you're not looking for a guy who's going to be your long-term piece right now. You're finding out who are the guys that you want to stick with once Tatum is actually back. And so I think a guy like Luka Garza, who dominated college basketball, dominated in 22 games in the G League, and just has never gotten any consistent opportunities in the NBA with Detroit or Minnesota, but has shown flashes when he's gotten chances. Or guys like Kada, Amari Williams as a rookie, finding out is a low-cost option at center possibly the next piece for you, rather than spending for somebody right now in the short term, when really I think some of these guys are deserving of extended chances, Xavier Tillman included. So I think for the Celtics, to me, like, I think if they just go in with the roster as is. Obviously, the team is not going to be anywhere nearly as exciting as it was last year, but I still think there's so many young guys that are intriguing and deserving of opportunities that there's an advantage to that with the amount of minutes and chances those guys get for that next year's team in 26, 27, whether it's Gonzalez, whether it's Simons, whether it's Hauser getting extended time, whoever you really want to give those opportunities to in the young roster, because for Boston this year, the advantage of, being a 7 seed, a 9 seed, a 10 seed in that play-in range or worse, next year's draft class is stacked. So I don't think Boston is going to be bad enough to bottom out or necessarily, but the Dallas Mavericks just moved up to the number 1 pick with the 11th best odds. Every year, a team with 7th or worst odds has moved into the top 4. And there's at least 3 number 1 pick quality guys next year, with Cam Boozer at Duke, Darren Peterson at Kansas, and then Brockton's own AGD Bonsa going to BYU. So I think for the Celtics, there's advantages to testing the young guys for the long term, but also for potentially getting higher draft odds and a loaded draft class.
Do you think there's any chance, Kevin, that there's a strategy the Celtics employ where they look to get into that lottery spot?
Maybe. I mean, Jaylen Brown turns an ankle and you keep him out for 2 months instead of 2 weeks. I mean, I think ultimately that's the type of stuff you could see. But, I think for Boston, we're still in a position now where we know teams have called about Derek White and about Jaylen Brown. Nobody has reached that threshold of what Boston's looking for yet. But if, deadline time comes and, it's late January, early February, and Boston still has Derek White and Jaylen Brown on their roster, and there's another team that's like, we are a Derek White away from winning an NBA Finals. We are a Jaylen Brown away. It's tougher to deal guys during the season than it is during the offseason, but ultimately that's when the price could really hit its peak for those guys, where somebody just goes over the top and Boston has like no choice but to say yes because the offer is so significant. So I think that's the type of scenario like that hits what you're talking about, Meghan.
So, Kevin, the thing hanging over all this is Tatum's recovery, right? And he had the speed bridge surgery the day after he got hurt. To me, and I've always hoped, I guess maybe felt isn't the right word, I've hoped that maybe he could come back in March and they could really do something at that point, because that would be 10 months after a speed bridge surgery. But by them trading Porzingis and Holiday and talking about staying under the aprons, maybe even the first apron and maybe out of the tax altogether, is that them telling us, without telling us, that they don't want or don't expect Tatum to be back at all this year?
Yeah, I think that's got to be part of it because, with the Celtics, look, you don't want to say at this point Tatum might come back. I don't think you want to put that out there. I think it to be the type of thing where, Boston is on a 50-win pace and Tatum is fully healthy and he's able to come back in February, but you wait to March and you feel like it's safe to bring him back. I think it would be something that in the moment were to happen if the Celtics are, exceeding expectations. Pritchard has an all-star caliber year. Jaylen Brown is even better. Like the rookies are key guys, and you're not even missing Drew Holiday. You're not even missing Kristaps Porzingis. Like that's a possible outcome. I think the Celtics are at least going to be competitive, but maybe they win a lot more than people expect. And so in that case, I think for Boston, they'd at least think about it because, I mean, look, Tatum is the dude who texted Kobe, after Kobe passed away. He's the guy who idolized Kobe. Kobe came back in 9 months. You don't think Tatum's going to do everything in his power to come back in 9 months and try to do what Kobe did. So I think Tatum's intentions, this is just me, hypotheticals. It's just, I don't know anything here. I would imagine Tatum would want to come back in 9 months. And so we'll see how the Celtics look at that time when it comes.
Kevin O'Connor of Yahoo Sports and the Kevin O'Connor Show.
Also the pride of Brockton, Mass. Because he brought up DiBattista earlier, so I had to mention that.
Of course.
Represents.
Yeah.
So we have seen Joe Mazzulla as a coach who has had a couple different iterations of very stacked rosters. And a cornerstone of Joe Mazzulla's coaching philosophy has been the three-point shot. How much do you expect that philosophy and Mazzulla's overall approach with the team to change with how dramatic the changes to this roster are so far this offseason?
I don't think it's going to change at all. I mean, I think Missoula is going to, that's just part of the state of the NBA today. I mean, your 3-point rate rises every single year. In the regular season, it rises every single year. In the playoffs, I don't think Missoula is going to stray from that necessarily. Where I do think he should evolve is adding back some of those layers that we're missing this season. More movement off the ball, more ball movement, more player movement. I think having more to go to other than what their set offense is. And so I think this sticks to, like, you're experimenting with minutes with these young guys, experimenting with different roles for these young guys. You're pushing the limits of what you think you can get from Brown and Pritchard and White, assuming, everybody's back that's still on the roster. But it's also for Missoula. Well, how do you toggle from winning mode to developmental mode? And developmental mode also includes yourself. And installing new things in the system and experimenting with different things. Because I think, even Oklahoma City this year, they win the NBA Finals. And Mark Daigneault, their head coach, during the season was asked about them using two bigs, Chet Holmgren and Isaiah Hartenstein. And he's like, well, we're using the regular season to experiment with different things. And sometimes we're doing it against teams where it might not make sense to do. That's Oklahoma City, the champions that did that during the entire 82-game regular season. And so I think the Celtics, a team entering next season without championship aspirations, there's no excuses. They're the team that more than any team should be experimenting and figure out, how do we optimize this for when Tatum is back, and how do we make it so we're even more favorites in the weak Eastern Conference once he is back. So I think this year's very important for all of that from a developmental standpoint with players, roster, and coaching staff.
Kevin, I think you brought up a great point about their movement on offense and cutting and all that. And we saw Brad Stevens talk about that after the draft, that he likes guys that are going to be cutters on offense. And I felt like 2 years ago when they won the championship, they were much better moving without the ball than they were last year. And my question to you is, A, why do you think that is? And B, is there, besides just Missoula preaching it more, are there certain guys you just expect that more from going into this season?
I think it's like sometimes, us as people, sometimes we fall into different habits and we forget our old habits. I mean, like, again, with OKC, like another example there. In the finals, they start having Shai Gilgeous-Alexander screen more often, or get screened more often, or vice versa. That's something they did a lot the year prior. But then they get a center in Isaiah Hartenstein, and they kind of go away from it for the full season. And it's like, oh, wait a minute, I used to do this. And I think with Boston, you just develop new habits, you get away from things, and maybe there was a bit of fatigue as well after the championship and the Olympics for guys last year, where you're not wanting to cut as much, it's not as intentional. So I think it's a lot of things that you see, these habits that kind of reflect us as people. I mean, we fall in and out of different habits as well. So I think that happened on a team-wide scale with the Celtics last year, and maybe be a bit more intentional this year without the championship expectations.
I think that's a great perspective. Final question for me, Kevin. So we are awaiting this changing of hands to Bill Chisholm and company for the ownership of the Celtics. What have you heard about the expectations of how smoothly that will go, the expectations around this new ownership group, and really beyond this year? Because I think, especially with the Tatum injury, a lot of people are chalking up moves to this summer saying, well, they're forced into this situation. You can't look at the new ownership so much for that, as much as the CBA, the injury, what they did the last couple of years in terms of spending. But like long-term outlook, what do you expect from the new ownership?
I mean, everything I've heard is more on the Grossbeck side, that, he wanted to stick around for more championships. And it seems like
I kind of wanted him to too, Kevin.
I know, seriously. And I think that's a bit less likely right now. And ultimately with Chisholm, all I've heard about him is that he is the real deal in terms of like his Celtics fandom. It's not some phony fake Celtics fandom. I think he is a real fan. And so you'd hope that this new ownership that it can at least channel some of what has made Wyc Grousbeck so successful. And part of that, to me, like the key ingredient over the years, especially, in the prime days of Boston sports, winning titles, competing for titles every year, it's ownership empowering front offices to do what they think is best for the franchise. And Danny Ainge, he's hired in 2003, trades Antoine Walker, a fan favorite. He's willing to trade away Garnett and Paul Pierce to the Nets, get a haul back in return turn. And ultimately, I think that happened with the Patriots, with Belichick getting rid of Seymour early, and so on and so forth. It happened with all of these teams. Red Sox trading Nomar. That's the key ingredient. Empowering a good, smart front office to do what they think is best. And so as long as Chisholm empowers Brad Stevens, who has shown with every move he's made to be a very savvy, very smart general manager, as long as they continue empowering him and giving him the money that he needs to do the job at his best, I mean, to me, that's all he's going to do above all else is empower Brad Stevens and this really good Celtics front office.
Last question from me, Kevin. Our conversation today, and really the conversation around the Celtics over the past couple months, has been all about, hey, they might be a play-in team, and if things go right, they could be like a 5 seed. Pritchard's an all-star, as you mentioned, things like that. Is there anything they can do this summer? A major, minor, moderate move, anything they can do that will change that conversation, and we'll sit here and say, hey, they can be a top 3 team in the East and potentially make a deep playoff run?
I don't think so. I mean, I think the East has gotten so much better around them, and without Jason Tatum, it's just so unfair to expect this team to be a top 3 team in the Eastern Conference. I don't think there's a move that Boston should make that puts themselves in that conversation unless internally they feel like Tatum's going to be ready in February or March. And in that case, then sure, maybe you go for it. But I think the way the Knicks have improved and could continue to improve, the way the Hawks have improved, the way the Cavs are going to try to improve, and Indiana's taking a step back and all that. But the East is better at the top. To me, Boston, the best thing for the long term is to make this a developmental, experimental year, and then come back in 26, 27, and 27, 28. And then that's when you go forward again. Because, again, like this draft this year, there's no guarantee the Celtics will even be in the lottery. But the fact that they have their own pick, it's a very unique chance, very unique opportunity this year with a loaded draft class up top. Cam Boozer, AJ DiBonsa, Darren Peterson, among others right now that are playing in the under 19 competition for Team USA. There's a lot of number 1 pick quality talent and a lot of guys that belong in any draft in any year in the top 3. There could be 7, 8 guys that are worthy of that. And so I think if the Celtics are able to fall into that range and get Tatum back and still have Brown and still have White and a really promising young player, like that's what sets up sustainable success for the next decade. And that's what the Celtics should be thinking about, not just the 25-26 season.
Okay, well, it sounds like there are a lot of reasons and a lot of names there to follow Kevin O'Connor. You can find him at Yahoo Sports. You can find him as the host of the Kevin O'Connor podcast, the Kevin O'Connor Show, anywhere that you get your podcast. Hey, Kevin, thanks so much for joining us, especially right before the holiday. This was really awesome. Hope to have you on again sometime.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Meghan and John. And John, Brockton represent, man. Good to talk to you.
Pride of Brockton, Kevin O'Connor. Forget about Rocky Marciano, Meghan. It's okay. And Al Davis, right?
You guys can probably talk about that another time.
Yes.
We'll talk about that another time. There's plenty of Brockton legends.